So we're going to go ahead and start Chapter 8, Lecture Introduction, Part 2, and we're going to jump right back into where we stopped with some vocabulary. So the next vocabulary word is called separation of powers. And we've covered this before. This is just the idea that different branches have different powers. And each of those powers is used to balance the other branches so that no single branch becomes too strong or knocks everything out of balance. The textbook definition for separation of powers is a principle by which powers are divided among different branches of government to make sure that no one branch has too much power. And this idea comes back to our guy from last chapter, a philosopher named Montesquieu. So Montesquieu is the one that came up with this idea of balance the government and separate powers out so that each part of the government kind of checks the other ones. And that keeps any single part from becoming too powerful. So it's kind of the exact opposite of a king who would generally have all of the power invested in himself and be making every decision on his own. All right, our next set of definitions is the idea of an implied power. So an implied, if you're implying something, you're not outright saying it, you're just kind of making people think it. So if you imply something like, in the South we say, bless their heart, like that idea is, I'm implying that there's something wrong with that person, but I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying there's anything bad about them. I'm just saying, bless their heart. And pretty much everyone around me knows what I'm actually saying. So the definition for implied power is a power not enumerated in the Constitution, but suggested in its language. So in the Constitution, they don't say every power that every government can ever have. They just kind of tell them, you can do what you need to do when you need to do it, as long as you can justify it. In the Constitution, that's actually called the elastic clause because it stretches. That's how the government is able to do stuff like require you to have car insurance or now require you to have health insurance. It's not written in the Constitution. It is just a part of the implied powers of the government to protect people that way. Our next vocabulary word is judicial review. And basically what this is saying is that the court has the ability to decide if something that one of the other branches is doing is constitutional or not. That is the definition. Specifically, power of the court to judge whether or not actions of other branches are constitutional. And this is super important because this is literally where the judicial branch gets all of its power. This is exactly what gives them the ability to check the other branches. Process is the idea that legal rules and procedures the government must observe before depriving a person of life, liberty, or property. So the general idea here is that the government has to go through a set of rules and a set of checks before they can take any of the rights that we talked about with John Locke and that we talked about in the Declaration of Independence and that we talk about in the general idea of the Constitution away from you. They're not allowed to take your life without a trial. They're not allowed to take your property without a trial. They're not allowed to basically deprive you of freedom, put you in jail without a trial. If they do that, then the government is literally breaking the law. Now that only applies to citizens, but that is the idea behind it. Number 10, equal protection. The idea that the law is applied equally to everybody, regardless of a person's race, religion, political beliefs, or other qualities. Obviously, we know this has not always been the case. Obviously, we know that there have been people that are treated poorly in America based solely on race, gender, religion, or political belief. That has happened. That happens today to some instance, but it is not supposed to. People that stand up to that, people that try to keep that from happening, as far as I'm concerned, those are the people that are the patriots. Those are the people that love America more than anyone else because they're the ones standing up for what America is supposed to be. And then finally, naturalization. This is the idea of how a person becomes a U.S. citizen. People that aren't born here aren't not immediately U.S. citizens. They have to go through a naturalization process. They have to basically show that they can become part of the American society. And that was a necessary part of the early American life, and it is a necessary part of American life today because people move here and we want them to be part of our country. Part of our country has literally always been built based on the idea of other people being able to come here and bring all the things they know and all the things that they care about to our country, and thus enriching all of us. So what is this entire chapter going to be about? Lesson 1 is principles of the government. Lesson 1 is basically, what are all the powers of the government? How do they work, and how do we amend the Constitution? The amendment of process is a big deal. It allows our Constitution to change with the times. It allows our Constitution to be altered to fit the ideas that we grow into. So some of those things that they grow into are things like the idea of religion, of race, of gender, not being a way that we can discriminate against people. The idea that it's not possible to have separate but equal schools, but rather that our schools are supposed to be for everybody that lives in those areas. That we are supposed to be able to take care of anybody in our schools, regardless of their ethnicity, of their religion, of their background. If they are a kid that lives in the area of that school, they should be allowed to go there. That is what it is about. And we should make sure that those schools are as good as we possibly can make them so that every kid gets a chance to live in America. That is something that the amendments allow us to do. The amendments allow us to change our Constitution to fit the ideas that we believe in now, as opposed to the ideas that people 70 or 80 years ago may have believed more. Lesson 2 is the government and the people. So we're going to go back through the branches of government again, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. We're also going to talk about the rights and the responsibilities of citizens. You've got a lot of things that are going to be protecting you over the course of your life in this country. You've got the ability to say that you think our government may be bad, and no one's supposed to be able to punish you for that. You've got the right to lead people into a conversation about how and why things need to change. But you also have responsibilities. You have the responsibility to educate yourselves, to vote, to basically get out and try to make changes to the country based on the powers that are given to you in that Constitution. If you can do that, then you're doing what you should be. That is our Chapter 8 lecture intro. I hope it's helpful to you. Pay attention to the vocabulary in this chapter. There is a lot of it. Later.